And hopefully everyone's staying warm today. It stopped snowing, so hopefully it continues to not snow. Okay, so give it another minute or so, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we should be good to get going now. So welcome everyone. For anyone that might not know me, my name is Kathy Daniels. I work as the manager of the Flow Cytometry Core Facility here at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. And today we are very incredibly happy to host Sean Burke from DeNovo Software. So Sean had reached out to us about doing these webinars that we have scheduled that we're going to be doing on a weekly basis for 3 weeks. So today's the first session of 3 that we're going to be doing at the same date and time each week. Exactly. So January 26th, February 2nd, and February 9th. Thank you, Sean. And each session is going to be slightly different. So feel free to use that same registration link that we sent out that you used to register for today for the future sessions. And that being said, I'm very happy to introduce Sean Burke from DeNovo Software. He's been with DeNovo for over 10 years now, and I can personally say that he is wonderful, and he is an expert in FCS Express and analyzing flow data, and we're very grateful to have him here today. He's the Director of Research, Marketing, and Business Development, and he's going to be giving us a nice introduction to FCS Express 7 today. So with that, welcome, Sean, and thank you.
Yeah, hi Kathy, and thanks for having me out here today, and thanks to the core facility at Sloan Kettering, and more importantly, thanks to everybody for showing up today. I see we got a number of people on the line. So I am going to take my video off. Everybody got to see my ugly mug there for a second, but I'm going to turn it off. We'll increase some of the bandwidth for the audio and the video coming over to you guys. And again, yeah, today's session on FCS Express is a bit of an introduction and getting started with the software. Usually when I'm doing these things in person at Sloan Kettering, I'll ask everybody to kind of raise their hands and let me know who's been using the software or not, so I can kind of guide some of our analysis today, but I'll just kind of give everybody a little bit of an overview about FCS Express in general first for maybe about 5 minutes. I know everybody wants to dive into some data today. And then we're going to go over I'll show you my little agenda here today, some of the data analysis basics with the software. And there's kind of two different use cases and workflows that I'm going to cover. One is going to be within antibody titration. Don't worry, if you're not doing antibody titrations, that's fine. We're going to use the data set to give you an overview about kind of how to load data, how to work with gates, how to use data-specific gates, how to work with spreadsheets. So the data here is actually somewhat unimportant. We're going to give you the practicals of how to work with similar data sets in 2 different workflows. Now, when we're going on with the webinar today, if you have any questions, just take a moment, find the question and answers box in the Zoom meeting. You can ask any questions you might have there. If you'd like to interrupt and ask questions over the audio, feel free to do so. I think you might just have to raise your hand, and maybe Kathy will let you in to ask any questions that you have. But again, don't feel like you can't interrupt today. The training here is for you. If there's something you want to see done again, if there's something in particular you want to see, raise your hand, ask a question, and we'll be able to go over that with you. So to kind of get started here, I know, some people probably have never used FCS Express. Maybe some people have used it for a long time and they're just kind of coming back to get a little bit of information. But I always like to start, why use the software? Why are there so many people kind of moving away from other tools on the market? We know there's another software package out there, from different companies, from, BD, from Cytoflex, from Cytobank. So why use us? And I always like to compare it to kind of technology convergence. And I like to show these little pictures of things that all kind of devices that all do one thing. Without dating myself too much, this was the first cell phone that I had, this little Nokia. It made a phone call, you could send a $1 text message, and actually you could play a game of Snake, so maybe it did three things. But all of these things, they generally did one thing: GPSs, cameras, calculators, even computers. And really all of that is wrapped up into your smartphone now. And that makes life really convenient. You don't have to move and carry around all these different devices to actually do what you do in your daily life. And the same kind of thing can be said about working with flow and image cytometry data analysis. Generally, you're working with some sort of third-party tool, or even you're working with Diva or FlowJo or Cytobank or whatever, and then you do a lot of copying and pasting out to Excel, copying and pasting out to PowerPoint, using other tools like ModFit and Prism, and if you're doing imaging, Cell Profile and other segmentation tools. What we attempt to accomplish in FCS Express is bringing all of this into FCS Express. So we have spreadsheets in the software. We have the ability to create PowerPoint-ready presentations in the software. We can do t-tests, ANOVA tests, really a lot of the stuff that you can do with Prism, including graphing. And the really cool thing is, when we load new data, when we move gates, when we change things around in our analysis, we don't have to copy and paste and go out and recreate all those graphs. Our Excel spreadsheets in the software update in real time. So again, imagine moving a gate. If you're using another piece of software, you have to copy and paste the table out to Excel. You have to create a bar chart based off of that. In FCS Express, we just do it all in the software in real time, which is pretty nice. So again, if you haven't used us before, we've been around for a long time, since 1998. I was probably still in high school when FCS Express was released for the first time, again, to date me again. So we've been around a long time. People are publishing with us all the time. And right now we're on version 7 of FCS Express. Just probably next week, I think we're going to be updating FCS Express version 7. Everybody at Sloan Kettering is able to access FCS Express via the flow cytometry core facility site license. That means that this new update that's coming out next week, you're all going to have access to that. So make sure you check back on the DeNovo Software website about that update. It's going to have a lot of really cool new functionality. It all just gets rolled into your site license, so there's nothing extra that you have to do or pay for or anything like that. You just have to go and grab that update. And I'm going to skip over a few slides here, but I think one important thing to note about DeNovo Software is we're based in Los Angeles or in Pasadena, and these little yellow triangles that you see are places that we have folks kind of scattered throughout the world working on our team of experts to support you. So if you have questions, write into us at support@denovosoftware.com. Give us a phone call. We know that most analysis doesn't always get done between 9 and 5 Eastern time in the United States. If you write us a message at 2 in the morning, my colleague in Milan is going to write you back right away, generally within an hour or two, never more than 24 hours. So keep it in mind, we give a level of support that's very different than any other company you've probably been working with. So don't hesitate to reach out. Don't bang your head against the wall if you're trying to figure something out in the software. Just write us a question at support and we'll help you out with that. Now, before we jump into the software, a little bit of background. FCS Express is going to run on your Mac. It's going to run on your PC with the site license at Sloan Kettering. One username, you can use that on any number of computers that you want. So you could load something up on your Mac in the office, save it, bring it home, work on it on your PC at home, all interchangeable. We read from all cytometers that are on the market. When you're working with Cytec or Sony instruments, we're going to read the raw spectral data from that as well. So, when you move out of the Sony and Cytec software, we can even do unmixing directly in FCS Express. There's not going to be any sort of limit to the parameter or the number of events in a data file. In fact, we work really well with very large data sets. Big data files that tend to crash or slow down other software generally work very, very well in FCS Express. Now, in one of our next training sessions, we're going to go over compensation in some detail, but rest assured that whether you're doing compensation at the time of acquisition, whether you're doing post-acquisition compensation in FCS Express, we can accommodate any and all forms of compensation that you want to do, including if you want to do your own unmixing in FCS Express when you come off of a Cytec or a Sony instrument, we can support that in the software. Now, we also have all the kind of common statistics you're going to be looking for, all the commonly used plot types that you see in other software, that you see in publications. And one thing I'd like to point out, if you are coming from a lab where you use something like Diva or Flojo before, and you come over to FCS Express and you can't find the plot type that you're looking for that you always use in Flojo, it doesn't mean it's not there. It just means that there might be a translation. We might call it something different. And just for instance, if you're used to working with zebra plots in Flojo, well, you come into FCS Express and you say, oh, where's the darn zebra plot insert button, right? We don't have one because we don't call it a zebra plot. We call it a contour plot with black and white stripes, right? So maybe the name isn't as cool, but the visualization is there. And again, if you can't figure out where it is, write us a question at support. We love those questions. We can answer those in about 30 seconds. They're very straightforward. So make sure you keep those questions coming. And what you're going to see today, I'm not going to go through all of the stuff I have here for these little applications examples, but keep in mind that your analysis is always going to be integrated with your final result in the software, either through spreadsheets integrated in FCS Express, graphing tools, reporting, getting all of your publications, ready, all of your figures ready for publications. We have ultra high resolution graphics. So, one common thing I hear is, the publisher calls for, say something silly like 378 DPI, they always come up with something. We have settings in FCS Express. You can come in and you can change your resolution of your exports to 378 DPI. So if the reviewer comes back and says they need something very specific or in particular, you can simply just go into FCS Express, change the setting, and that's going to reduce time. It's going to reduce complexity for getting together your final results. Now, again, today we're going to go over essentially two different use cases in the software. The first one that we're going to be working with today is kind of a workflow. If you're working with kind of a lower number of samples, you want to compare samples side by side in the same experiment. You just kind of want to get a quick and dirty result from whatever it is you're doing in the software. The second case, which I've classified as immunophenotyping, this is kind of more if you have more colors. When I say more, I mean 3 or more colors. If you have lots of samples that you're working with, this is the second kind of workflow where we utilize what's called batch processing. We utilize the data lists in FCS Express. So again, they're just kind of two different workflows. Don't focus so much on the data itself. The data is actually unimportant for once in your life. You can focus on the practicalities of inserting plots, creating gates, and getting going with an analysis. So with that being said, I'm going to jump over to FCS Express here. And we're going to give you, again, working with the first kind of workflow of an antibody titration to give you a little bit of an overview of how the software will actually get utilized. You can see here, I have FCS Express open, right? And you're probably saying to yourself, well, oh, this looks exactly like Microsoft Office. It looks like PowerPoint. It looks like Word. It can even look like Excel in some cases. And that is shamelessly by design, right? We know that if you have worked with PowerPoint before, you probably know if you wanted to insert a text box, you'd go up to the Insert tab, you choose a text box, you draw something on the page, and you put in information within that text box, right? And FCS Express is going to work the same way. You insert a text box, you move an object, you resize it, you can put it on the slide or on the paper and off the paper. Anything that falls on this kind of piece of paper is printable object, or if you export to PDF, it will be exported in the PDF. Anything that falls off to the side of it here, if you print it out, it's not going to be on the paper, but it is there for your analysis. So just like in PowerPoint, if you put something off to the side of your PowerPoint slides, it doesn't mean it's gone. It means it's just not there when you present your presentation. That also means if you need to do any sort of kind of text formatting, and this goes for, you'll see later, we'll put in kind of statistics into these text boxes and things like that. You can really format all of this to look exactly as you want, including things, like bullets and numbering and all of that. And you can even insert shapes, ellipses, arrows, that kind of thing. And you might think, oh, that seems like a little hokey, right? Well, it's kind of important. If you have a plot and you want to say, all right, well, this next plot is gated on this plot for your publication ready figure, well, you can put in a little arrow there, right? We see people putting little lines over things and then putting a text box over it to explain the figure, right? All of that's available, including things like pictures. So, you could put pictures of kittens, of your kids in your layout with your analysis, or better yet, you could put an MSKCC flow cytometry core logo up there, right? Give them a little bit of credit for the analysis that you're doing. So all of that is there. It works like PowerPoint. But when it comes to working with flow data, and let me use my handy dandy undo button up here, right? So you can see that we can undo and redo just like we would do in PowerPoint. That's going to work back to 30 steps by default. If you find yourself making a lot more mistakes than 30, well, you might want to restart your analysis. But if you really wanted to, you could actually undo up your undos to 100 in the options in FCS Express. But getting back here, right, we want to analyze some flow data. Now, the flow data that I want to start with today is this antibody titration. Okay, it's very simple. It's a CD3 staining. We've put in 0.3 microliters, 1.25 through 20 microliters of antibody. We want to figure out the MFIs of the CD3 positives, the MFIs of the CD3 negatives. We want to create a few gates on those things. And the other thing I should note about antibody titrations is if you're not doing them, you probably should, right? So if BD comes in and says you need 20 microliters of antibody to run the experiment, that's their best guess, right? If you do an antibody titration and you find that you reach saturation at 10 microliters of antibody, well, then your antibody goes twice as much and you save twice as much money when you actually use those antibodies and run that experiment. So I'm sure the core facility can help you, figure out how to do antibody titrations. But I know with other softwares, it's actually pretty difficult to do these things. And that's one kind of stopping place for people not doing
Oh, Sean, I think
them.
it's cutting out a little bit on the audio. So just a
But what we're gonna do
sorry.
today, we're going to run through this. And the first thing I want to do in FCS Express, yep. I got just if you have problems, just type it in the chat that you can't hear us so great, and then we'll. All right, I'm getting some notifications there, Kathy, that it says their audio is fine, so it might just be.
Okay, it might just be on my end. Sorry about that.
Yep. No, it's okay.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. So again, what we want to do here is get some data in here. We don't just want to work with shapes and text boxes and things like that. So to get this data into FCS Express, there's always a few ways that you can do things, but really one of the easiest ways to do it is kind of just like you would do in Microsoft PowerPoint. You would say you want to insert, a picture or an object. So I'm going to choose to insert a density plot. And FCS Express is going to prompt me and say, all right, well, where's the information that you want to put in that plot? So I'm going to come over and grab the first file that I have here, and I'm going to click open. And it doesn't mean I'm ignoring the rest of the data files, but what you want to do in FCS Express is after you insert a plot, or even before, you can open up what's called the data list, which is located in the data tab. And you're going to see that in that data list, I automatically have all of the data files that are in this folder. So FCS Express does this by default. You know that you generally store all the data files that you're looking to analyze within the same folder. So when you insert a plot for one data file, all of these are going to appear in the data list. And these are not your actual data files. I can click delete, right? I can remove these. It's not going to delete them from my hard drive. It's just going to delete them from this data list and me accessing them. So once we have one data file in here, we can kind of get going with this workflow. I'm going to show you how we're going to access the rest of these in just a few minutes. But generally, the first thing you want to do is pick and choose which parameters you're viewing on a plot. And it's pretty easy in FCS Express. You just click on the axis, you change to whatever parameters you want. In this case, the defaults are fine. But the other kind of nice tool here is if you have a lot of parameters, I know in this one I don't, but if I just start typing in CD3, it's going to jump me to the parameter of interest that I want to look at. Right, so keep in mind we have a little search functionality there, especially when you're working with the big SciTech data or stuff coming off of the LSRs. It's going to help you kind of sort through that. Now, generally, when we have a plot inserted, the first thing we want to do with our data is create a gate. We want to say, exclude all of the debris, exclude the stuff. So we're going to come up to the gating tab, and what I'm going to do is choose a rectangle gate. And I'm going to draw a gate over this population here in the middle. And I'm going to call this cells. And I'm going to click OK. That gate will get created. It will put a percentage up there for you. And what you're going to see is as you move that gate around, that percentage is going to update for you immediately. And that's one of these common themes that you're going to see in FCS Express. When you move a gate, statistics, anything you do is going to update in real time. Now, if I want to drill down on this population and I want to open up another plot that's only displaying the cells that fall within that gate, one thing we can do is drag and drop. We can take that gate, drop it onto another portion of the layout, and I'll do that again here so you can see it, right? I grabbed that gate, I dropped it, and it opens up a new plot that's only showing the events that fall within that gate. And again, as you move that gate, you're going to see everything update in other plots in real time. And that means that even if I come over here and I change to my CD3, right, we're updating to show where those events fall in real time. And that means I don't need this little plot, like PowerPoint. I can grab it, I can delete it, get it out of the way. I'm not really interested in using it. Now, just like PowerPoint, you're going to want to kind of arrange things on your page, right? So in PowerPoint, you'd probably grab a group of objects, you go to their home tab or their design tab, and you'd say, align the tops. And then we can snap the tops into place, align things onto the page. Now we do want to set up some other gates here, but before I do that, I want to show you where we handle the gating hierarchies, right? So you're probably wondering, all right, you created that cells gate, but where's that managed? How do I view that in context of all the other gates? Well, in the Insert tab, we have something called the Gate View. And if you insert a gate view onto your page, it's going to show you all of the gates that you've created. So what will happen is if I come in and I create another gate here for, say, my CD3 negatives, I'll draw something like that. I'll use a polygon this time. I'll call this CD3 minus, CD3 minus, right? You'll see that the gate gets created. And because the cells gate is already applied to this plot, FCS Express knows to put it into the hierarchy correctly. So if I come in and I want to do another gate here, now that I have that gate view expanded a little bit, right, I'm going to call this CD3 positive, and I'll put in another gate, I'll make it green this time, right? It falls into the correct place into the hierarchy. Now, when you're working with gating hierarchies, right, in this case, we're just working with a very basic, positive, negative, but you can change your gating hierarchies at any time, right? So if you need to kind of change around where things fall in the hierarchy, drag and drop, right? So keep that in mind. When you're doing things in FCS Express, if it seems to make sense to drag and drop, to do something, to perform an action, it will probably work, right? No matter where it is that you're doing it. Like if I wanted to get in another data file from the data list, I can drag and drop. It's going to ask me what type of plot I want to insert. And if I insert something like a color dot plot, you're actually going to see that the backgating from those gates is automatically applied to a color dot plot, right? So, just keep that in mind. You can drag and drop from gates, you can drag and drop from plots, you can drag and drop from the data list, however it is that you want to manage that. Now, when you build bigger gating hierarchies, and we're going to build one up in our immunophenotyping example in just a few minutes, well, you might not want to stamp this gate view on every single page, right? You can see here that we have the ability to add additional page tabs down here in FCS Express. These do get useful as your analysis gets bigger, but you may not want to have that gate view on every page. So we have something here in our View tab called the Gate Navigator. And this floats around. It's kind of like that data list. You can put it anywhere. If you're working with two computer monitors, you can put one on one side and one on the other. But what to note about the Gate Navigator and the Gate View is they're the same thing, except the Gate View gets printed, it gets exported, and the Gate Navigator is just a way that you can kind of move around and organize things. So if I change the gating hierarchy in a Gate Navigate and the Gate View, it gets changed in the Gate Navigator. If I change it over here in the Gate Navigator, it gets changed in the Gate View. So these work interchangeably. You can use them, whatever way that you want. This goes for formatting gate colors. It goes for changing anything about these. So you don't have to have this gate view kind of stamped on every single page all the time. Now, what we want to do next with this data set is we want to compare all of these data files side by side. And there's kind of two workflows for working with multiple data files in FCS Express. One is when you insert some plots for data, you can click on these little iteration numbers and skip between the different data files that you have in your data list with the plots that are on the page. And we can also do this here in our data tab. We can use these next and previous buttons to skip between the data files, right? So that's really convenient if you have lots of parameters or lots of data files. But sometimes you just want to say, right, I've got 6 data files. I want to view these side by side on the same page. That way I can do a kind of, quick analysis, take a look at everything, see if I have to adjust gates, very easily. And what we can do in FCS Express is we can use a functionality in the Home tab called Duplicate and Next, or Multiple Duplicate and Next. And what you can imagine this is going to do is it's going to duplicate these plots. It's going to move to the next data file in the data list. It's going to duplicate that plot again and do so over and over and over again until we run out of data files to duplicate, right? So if we want to get 6 data files on a page, this makes a lot of sense. If we have 60 data files, we probably don't want to end up with 60 data files in a little tiny space trying to compare them. But the batch processing, what I'm going to show you in the immunophenotyping, is meant for working with bigger data files. So in this case, again, what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab these 2 plots. I'm going to say multiple duplicate and next. And I'm going to ask FCS Express to put the new plots below the first ones and to just give them a little bit of space between the plots. And when I click OK, it's going to happen pretty quick. So keep an eye, right? I'm going to click OK. FCS Express is going to run all the data files from everything you have in the data list down the page. And then we're going to be able to view side by side, in this case, our antibody titration of 0.3 microliters, 1.25, 2.5, so on and so forth, down to when we get to 20. Now, if things ran off the page a little bit, don't worry, right? You can just do a quick undo. I'm hitting Control Z. I can probably size these plots just to be a little bit smaller so everything gets on the page. And I can just run that multiple duplicate and next. And what you're going to see, again, it's just going to quickly come up. We got everything kind of fitting on the page here. Okay. Now we have to make some decisions about what do we want to do with this data? What statistics do we need? What's going on with this with the gates, right? So one thing I like to do is first make sure all of my gates make sense, right? So when I look at this data, I can kind of scroll down here and I can see, all right, well, my negative control gate that I set up for my 0.3 microliters looks okay. For my lower titrations, it doesn't look so great for my higher ones. Maybe this gate that I set here for the positives needs to be moved out a little bit for my kind of higher concentrations. And that makes biological sense. We're throwing more antibody on these things, so the autofluorescence is going to bump up a little bit. The saturation on the cells is going to bump up a little bit. But what you'll find is that in FCS Express, all gates are linked together by default, right? They're assigned a global position. So if I move the gate for one sample, it moves it the same way across all of them. Now, when we want to work with gates independently for individual samples in FCS Express, we can make use of something called data-specific gates. That's up here in the gating tab. And when we click on a gate, we can say, make that gate data specific, and that gate will move independently for that individual data file. And I know we have some folks that come over from Flojo often. What you do in Flojo, gates are not global by default. They're data specific. Every file has its own gating position. And if you want to apply that to everything, you have to drag the gate to the top of the workspace and apply it to all samples. So FCS Express pretty much just does the inverse. We assign everything a global gate unless you want to make it data specific. And if you really hate the way that we do that, there's actually a user preference that you can switch it over so that things are data specific by default. But we know it would probably be a pain in the butt to have to come here and, every single gate I have to go up and click the data specific gate button. So there's a shortcut key, right? If I hold down the shift key and I move this gate, you can see that it's becoming data specific just by using that shortcut key. So again, I'm going to hold down shift, I'm going to move the gate, I'm going to hold down shift, I'm going to move the gate, and now these gates are all independent of the ones above. So again, if you need to do individual gating positions, you can click that little data specific gate button or use the handy dandy shift and move the gate control. So with this experiment, we've pretty much have everything we need from a gating and data file perspective, but we need to gather statistics for all of this. Now, there's a number of ways that you can get statistics in FCS Express. One is you can right-click on a plot and you can get some default statistics either for gates or quadrants or markers if we're using histograms. But what I want to really show you today is how we work with spreadsheets in FCS Express. So again, in the Insert tab, we have the ability to insert a spreadsheet. And when we do that, it's kind of like, lo and behold, Microsoft Excel is starting to appear in FCS Express. And again, I know everybody's worked with Excel, right? If you type in some values, you put in an equal, one cell divided by another, it calculates a result, right? So FCS Express works the same way. When you have a spreadsheet inserted, you're going to be able to come up here to the spreadsheet tab. You can change the fonts, the formattings. You can put in, all of your borders, your text wrapping. You can conditionally format. You can sort things, right? Imagine, we get a 96 well plate of GFP expression into here. We can actually sort it in FCS Express and show you the highest expressor. If you want to use things like formulas, all of the formulas that Excel has are here, right? So when I talked about doing t-tests and p-values, right, that's how we arrive at those things in the software, right? We could talk for hours about how spreadsheets work. That's kind of boring, right? Keep in mind they work just like Excel, so much so that if I type in, average and I select two cells, right, the same formula that you would be using in Microsoft Excel, it's going to work here in FCS Express. Okay, but we don't want you manually typing values in. We know that that's a big bummer, right? So what we can do is anywhere you see a statistic, you can grab that statistic and drop it into the spreadsheet. Or even if you have a gate and you don't want that percentage, you don't know what you want from that gate, you can drag it in there, and FCS Express is going to say, well, for your CD3 positives, what statistic do you want? And you can even multiple select a few of these things, right? So I'm going to say number of events and median. Those statistics are going to be inserted into the spreadsheet, but best of all, these are linked directly to the gates, right? So as I move that gate in that spreadsheet, we're looking at the MFI, the number of events, the percentage gated, and then if we come in and use our Excel formulas, say the median divided by the number of events, whatever that's going to tell us, this is just an example, right? It's going to give you a formulated result. But again, this is linked to the gates, right? So there's no need to create a table, copy and paste that out to Excel. When you go and show everything to your PI at some point and they say nudge that gate 1 pixel and see what happens, you don't have to go back and recreate the process again, right? You just move the gate, see what happens, you decide on an answer, and then move it back. But again, I know we have 6 data files and we have 12 gates we want to pull information for here. So another way that we can get information to the spreadsheet is via the data list. What we can do is grab all the data files in the data list, we can drag them to the spreadsheet and say, give me some information about all those data files. So for instance, if I want to say for CD3 negatives, give me the file name and the median, we'll use median as MFI here for my negatives. It's going to put in a column for the file name and the median, and we'll just kind of label this CD3 negative. Now, we also want to take a look at the CD3 positives here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to drag all of these into the spreadsheet again. Let's see if I can't get my drag and drop here to work for me. right? I'm going to say insert a statistic, and this time it's going to be CD3 positives. We'll gather the median for that again, and you can see that that range of data pops in there. So we'll call this CD3 positive MFI, all right? So the other kind of thing that we need for this antibody titration is there's a number of ways to kind of calculate, fold differences and things like that. We could do stain index in here. I'm going to keep it real simple today, though. We're going to do kind of an old-fashioned, better or worse. We're just going to divide the positive by the negative. And again, just like Excel, if I want to drag that formula down, now I have the positive divided by negative for all of my CD3 positives. As I move the gates, right, you can see all the grouped gates are updating together, all the data specific gates are updating independently, and we're starting to build up information for our antibody titration. Now, the last thing we might need is the concentrations, right? We can actually fill these out automatically from the data files if the information is written as a keyword. In this case, the information isn't, but a lot of times, you might know this trick about Excel. If you're working with a dilution series, you can grab the cell above it, multiply it by 2, and just drag that information down to fill out the spreadsheet. So in this case, I really have all the information I need to put together a pretty accurate antibody titration. And I can say for this spreadsheet, and let me make one little change to my spreadsheet here. I'm going to say in the spreadsheet to use the first row as labels. So kind of like Excel, if we're creating some sort of chart, you want to use the first row as labels. I can actually come in here and put in what's called a scatter with regression plot. And then I can plot out, all right, let's look at ratio versus concentration, right? Or ratio versus concentration on the X. And we can see we're starting to draw a curve, right? The one thing we're not so great about in FCS Express just yet is trying to automatically fit this line to a curve. So one thing you can do on every plot in the software is right-click and format it. Or you can choose in the formatting tab to come up and choose formatting for that plot. So what I'm going to do here is in my formatting for this regression plot is to use a Michaelis-Menten fit. Right? That's actually meant for antibody titrations. We get an R² value, we get Vmax, right? You can come in here, you can use 4PL fits, 5PL fits, right? In this case, the 4PL fit's got a better R², so maybe that's the way to do it. But keep in mind, there's a lot of different things here. Now, any particular plot that you click on is going to have its own formatting options, right? So if I wanted to take the x-axis and put that onto bi-exponential scaling and change the bi-exponential scaling with a slider bar, right? We can do that. If you wanted to come in and change what's on the title of that plot, right? Maybe I can just put in, my data is awesome. On that plot, it's now going to say my data is awesome, right? So you can change anything about these plots, the ticks, the labels, titles, scaling, all of that stuff is accessible directly in FCS Express, really before we even go anywhere else. Now, again, I know we've got a lot of plots here. We've got these things that are kind of on the page. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cut these. That's a Control-X command. I'm going to paste them with a Control-V on the second page, and I've got a 2-page analysis now, right? On my first page, I've got all of my plots and my gates that are kind of showing me how I perform this analysis, and I have on the second page the results of that analysis, where I can kind of come in and see, all right, there's not much difference between 10 and 20 microliters, and I can probably get away with 10 microliters for this particular antibody titration. So one thing you're going to want to do at some point is save your analysis, right? So I'm going to come up here and do a save as, and I'm just going to stash this over on my desktop. I'm going to call it a titration. And what that will do is anytime you come back and you need to reopen this up, you can reopen it. You can start working with your data. If you want to, you can replace data that's in the data list with new data files and kind of use this as a template for use over and over again. But the other thing you're probably going to want to do is, we know this is not the be-all end-all, right? You want to get this information out to PowerPoint. You want to create a PDF. Well, we can come up here to the File tab. We can say export as PowerPoint or PDF, or if you want a high-resolution TIFF or BMP, you can do that. But I want to show you PowerPoint because we do some pretty cool things with our PowerPoint exports from FCS Express. So FCS Express just automatically launched up PowerPoint here on my other screen. So let me kind of zoom this in a little bit so we can look at it. So we have a page for our charts, we have a page for our plots. Now what we do in FCS Express is every object on that page is an individual high resolution graphic, right? So this isn't like a big one graphic with everything, you have to break it apart in Illustrator and things like that. If you find out that 10 microliters is what you want to use, well, you can grab that plot, you can make it real big, you can bring this to the front and you can use that in your weekly meeting, right? Or if that's your really important thing for publication, you can use this high resolution graphic. Now, when you work with PowerPoint on a PC, this does not work for Mac. It's a limitation of PowerPoint for Mac, but you can actually ungroup these objects, right? So instead of putting little white text boxes over axis labels, because you don't want to show CD3 FTSE, you just want to show CD3, well, because you've ungrouped it, you can make the change there. You can put this somewhere else, right? If all you need is the distribution of the data for some sort of figure that you're putting together for your paper, well, because you ungrouped it, you can pull it out and you can put that into your paper. And again, I know this is being done in PowerPoint here, but it's going to save you time. I see people doing this stuff all the time. Of course, any formatting changes you make in FCS Express are going to be carried over to PowerPoint automatically though. Okay. So again, this workflow, what we covered here, how to insert plots, how to work with multiple data files at the same time in a layout, how to create gates, how to work with gating hierarchies, how to create data-specific gates, how to format plots, how to work with spreadsheets, how to insert graphs, right? Sure, we did a lot here with just a kind of very basic analysis. But that being said, if there's any questions about anything I have open now that we want to take a quick look at, just type in a quick question in the chat window, raise your hand. We can address a few questions here before we go on to the the immunophenotyping real quick to show you the other workflow. I don't see anything coming through just yet. And if I do, I can always come back. We can always spend some extra time on that. But let me switch gears here, and we're going to talk about another type of workflow. Again, this one is going to be immunophenotyping, right? So in this case, what we want to look at is we have a few different colors for analysis, right? We have more than one, right? And that's probably going to be typical of most experiments you're doing, right? So in this data set, we have CD4 staining, CD44, CD62L. We have a mutant sample we want to look at. We have a wild type sample we want to look at. And in a typical experiment, you're going to have more than just, one or two samples. You're going to have, 60, 600. Right? This is going to be the workflow for you if you're working with a few colors, if you're working with many data files. And we're going to accomplish this in probably just about the next 10 minutes here. So we already learned a lot of the basics in the software. We're just going to learn how to apply these to working with more data files and working with more parameters. So in the previous antibody titration, I showed you inserting a data file by inserting a plot. Well, you can insert a data file in FCS Express, kind of like if you wanted to insert an image in a PowerPoint, just by dragging from your desktop or whatever location on your PC into the software. FCS Express is going to say, what type of plot do you want to insert? I'm going to say, put in a density, and that data file is going to be automatically inserted into FCS Express just from your hard drive. But again, we know that there's other data files in there. You want to work with them most likely, so we're going to pull them into the data list. Now, since we're going to work in this kind of more of a batch mode, we want to get things organized in the data list a little bit better, right? I might want to run my wild type sample first. So what I can do is kind of bump that up to the top of the list, right? I want to get these things in some sort of order. So that way, when I use these next and previous commands, it's going through in an order that makes some sense. So I'll put in my mutant next, and then I'll have all of my FMO controls in there. So for this experiment, I'm going to kind of get started here by putting in a gate view on the page over here. So as I create gates, we're going to see them up here. And I'm just going to kind of rock and roll through everything here. We have a 7A-AD stain, so this is a live dead stain, so anything that's negative for 7A-AD, we're going to be considered live, right? So that got created. I'm gonna make this plot a little bit smaller, so the rest of my plots will be a little bit smaller. I'm gonna drag and drop this out and change back to my scatter parameter here, right? So these are already gated on the live cells. I'm gonna create a gate here. I'm gonna call these cells at this point, because they're not debris and they're not live. You can see my gating hierarchy starting to get filled out, right? I'm gonna drag and drop this in here. We're gonna change the CD4, right? We're gonna create a gate here for CD4 positive, right? I'm gonna call this CD4 positive. We're gonna give it a different gate color. And again, you're gonna see my gating hierarchy build up, right? I want to drag and drop this gate out here, and this is kind of our endpoint for this analysis, where we're going to be looking at 64 versus 44. And for this plot, I'm simply going to use a quadrant. All right. So in this case, I'm just interested in CD4 positives, for this particular plot. If you wanted to do something where you're comparing CD4 positives to CD4 negatives, well, you could just duplicate that plot. I did a copy and paste. I created a new plot. And if I come in here and I create a gate for CD4 negatives, call this CD4 negatives, and we'll give it a gate color we haven't used yet. All right, I can take this gate, I can drag it down here, and you can see that we're comparing our CD4 negatives to CD4 positives at this point, right? So, we set up a multicolor analysis pretty quickly, and the workflow remains the same. If you're working with 4 colors or you're working with 40, it's just a matter of dragging and dropping gates to kind of create the plots that you want to look at, okay? Now, when I have this information in here, I probably want to use my FMO controls to set my gates appropriately. In this case, I just used a wild type sample to set this up, but I can utilize the data list here. I can click over to my CD4 negative or my CD4 FMO where I don't have any CD4 staining, and probably set up my gates for my CD4 appropriately. I can come over here, right? Let me get rid of this extra plot that I don't really need today. But if I want to set up for the CD44, right, I can adjust this quadrant. I can come over here, click on this one, adjust my quadrant. And I can kind of move back and forth, make sure I get the correct gating position I want based off of my FMOs. And once I do that, then I'm pretty much ready to start creating some statistics and reporting this analysis in some sort of batch way. So in this report for my data, I do want to include the gate view. So I'm going to put that on the page. And I also want to get some statistics out of here. So again, one thing I mentioned before is if you want to get some default statistics, things like quadrant statistics, well, you can right click on a plot. If it's showing a quadrant, well, it's going to give you default quadrant statistics. And when you have a statistics table, again, remember in FCS Express that right click and drag and drop do a lot. So if I right click, maybe I don't want the overlay or the file name because it's the same, right? On this particular plot, we're not overlaying anything, it's all the same file. Maybe I want to put in the X median so I can look at my CD44 MFIs, right? You can gather that information any way that you want. Now, these default tables are good for some things. They're not the most beautiful thing in the world. It's because they're default, right? But if I insert a text box, I can actually start creating, whatever sort of information I want. I can call this today's experiment, right? Kind of like Microsoft Word. In a text box, I could put in a table, right, of my own design, my own custom formatting, whatever it is I want. And if I know in this table, I want to put in %live, right? Well, I can type in %live, and I've got that information here, and I can drag it and drop it into that table, right? If I want %cells, right? Or in this case, let's do number of event cells. Let's say number, let's see if I can get this working here, number of events cells, right? So I don't have that statistic, but if you remember from the spreadsheets, I can drag and drop the gate. I could say, give me number of events. That information is going to be put in there. And then maybe, my CD4 positive. Drag and drop, get that information into there, and I have that in there. Now you can see we're retaining the formatting from all of those gates, right? We're retaining the colors and things like that. But again, just like PowerPoint, just like Word, I can come in here, I can change the fonts, I can, maybe change everything to a blue, make it bold, right? We can make that look like whatever it is that we want. And again, because this originates from the gates, as you make changes to the gates, as you move between different data files, all of that information is going to update. Now, the other thing that we can do in FCS Express is we know that there's information associated with this experiment, like the day that you acquired the data, who acquired the data, what keywords you typed in, what was the sample ID and DIVA and things like that. Well, that's all really important information that we don't want you to have to be kind of moving between your lab notebook, experiment data files and things like that, especially if it's within the data file itself. So if you grab a whole plot and you drag it into a text box somewhere, you can insert something called a keyword token. And this is essentially information that's coming from the time of acquisition, that's coming from your cytometer, right? So things like the date that you created this data file. Well, that's pretty useful, right? You don't have to go back to your lab notebook and figure out what day that you ran that thing. Maybe drag and drop something else in here. We'll see if we can find another useful piece of information. Right, and I know we have some in here, of course. So, down here, let's see here. Let's put in something that will change, like maybe the time we acquired the data file, right? And then we know what time we acquired this data file. And again, because this is coming from the data file itself, as I make a change, things like the date, the time, who acquired this, are all going to update. And there's no going back to your lab notebook to try and figure out what you did that day, right? You know that this information is coming from the data file, so you're not going to have to manually type it in, worry about making a mistake. This kind of information, the more information you can enter at the time of acquisition, the better you're going to be downstream, especially when you come back to this experiment 3 years later and you forgot what the heck you did that day, right? All of it's going to be stamped here. So again, once you have an analysis kind of created like this, you can run what we call a batch process. So you can quickly export information for 5 data files, 50, 500, 5,000, however many you have, right? Or you could use this as a template and use it over and over again. So next time you run this immunophenotyping, you can just simply load your data in here, click run and be done. So what our batch does is if we come up to batch and batch actions, we can say something like save to PowerPoint, right? And what I'm going to tell FCS Express to do is save this to a file on my desktop, and I'm going to call this analysis. And what's going to happen is when FCS Express runs this batch process, it's going to create one PowerPoint file with a new slide for every single data file that I have in my data list, all right? Now, maybe I wanted a PDF report of this at the same time. Doesn't mean we have to do them separately, right? We can just come in here and say, well, let's create a PDF, put it on my desktop, and I'm going to call this analysis. And I can even create separate PDFs for all the data files. But if I do that, I have to give them separate file names. So we have this little button here, and if you put in the current batch iteration, essentially what that's going to do is for every data file, it's going to call it analysis 1, analysis 2, analysis 3. You can even put in things like the sample name, the date, the time in there. So that way all of your PDFs are named accordingly. So very quickly, I'm going to run this batch. Again, it's going to happen very fast. It's going to crunch through the 5 data files that we have here. It's going to export to PowerPoint. It's going to export to PDF. I can actually see all the PDFs being created on my other screen, but don't worry, we'll launch that up here. The PowerPoint's going to launch automatically. So here comes my PowerPoint. Show you that first, okay? So just like our kind of one-off PowerPoint, we get all the plots, everything that we want at high resolution, vector graphics if we need to grab that and put it in a publication, but we have one slide for every data file, right? So instead of using the same layout to compare different files side by side, where you may have lots of plots and lots of statistics, you can use the batch processing to kind of collate this out to a PDF report. Or a PowerPoint report. My PDFs, I asked them to give me one PDF for every data file, right? So here's analysis 2, second data file, analysis 1, my wild type. So again, you can utilize this and leverage it. If you just want to compare sample 1 to sample 2, or you have a bunch of data files with a really big gating hierarchy, utilizing the batch process is a really great way to do it. Now, again, once you've kind of created this analysis, you don't have to recreate the wheel every time you want to do something, right? We know that it would be a pain to have to come back and reset that up every time, right? So what I can do is, I'll just call this analysis immuno, is I can close this out. And, when I go back into FCS Express tomorrow, I can come up and I can open up this .fav file. That's our way of saying this is a layout file in FCS Express. It's going to launch up into exactly what I did yesterday or the last time that you saved this. So you have all the data files here, everything's ready to go. But if I had a new set of data, I'll mock it up. I'll use the same set I did, but just, as an example here, you come in and say add a data file, and I can come over here and let me grab my sample data set. Let me go find it on my other screen here. And it's going to be, sorry, I'm just kind of fishing through where my data is here. All right, found it there. I can come in, I can grab whatever new data files I have for that day. And essentially what we do is we say change data on all plots. And now you're working with your new data files, right? So again, use these things as templates. If you have something similar, you don't have to recreate the wheel every single time to get going with those. So again, you can start typing in some questions if you have any. I just wanted to recap what we talked about in the second workflow here. Again, if you have kind of bigger data files that have more parameters, if you have lots and lots of data files, you can set up FCS Express to be kind of a templated analysis for as many parameters as you want, for as many data files as you want, utilizing the batch processing, batch exporting to PowerPoint, to PDF. We can also go out to things like Excel and export directly to images. They're always, it's always a really great way of performing analysis. And in most cases, people are going to be using the second workflow that we showed. More often than not, folks are not doing a kind of one-off, kind of compare a few different data files to each other. I like to call those suck it and see experiments, right? We just do something real quick to see what happens, see what's going on. That's kind of when you use that first workflow. But when you're starting to do kind of a more in-depth analysis, you're going to be doing experiment repeats. You're going to be doing that, daily, weekly, something like that. You're going to be wanting to kind of move into or graduate into the immunophenotyping workflow. So, with that, I wanted to wrap up and say thank you today for coming out and listen to me talk about data analysis again for, about an hour here today. I do want to point out that in our next data session, we're going to be covering compensation in some more detail about how to work with that, how to create your own, how to work with compensations and modify them that came from the time of acquisition. We're going to give a primer on high dimensional data reduction. So if folks have heard about, working with TISNI, VISNI, UMAP, FLOSOM, all these things have, cool acronyms to what they actually mean. We're going to break down what those kind of tools do, how to use them, how to understand working with the plots, right? Give you some ideas about what you can do and what you can't do, the pitfalls that a lot of people run into when they first start working with these algorithms, so you don't have to make those mistakes. And then we're going to swing back on February 9th. If we had any folks here that were previously Flojo users or they're currently Flojo users and they're looking to transition a little bit more into FCS Express, just like in the beginning, I mentioned a little bit about some of those translations, right? So we don't call things a zebra plot in FCS Express. We call it a contour plot with black and white stripes, right? We don't have the table editor. We have our spreadsheets. So I'm going to go over some of those things, and that way it's going to give make folks a little bit more comfortable kind of coming into FCS Express, even if you've been working with another software package for a long time. Will help you make some of those translations and answer your questions. So with that, if there's any questions, you can again type them into the chat window, into the questions and answers window. I'd be happy to answer any sort of questions that have been coming in. And I don't see anything coming through here just yet. One question I usually get, right, how do we access FCS Express at the flow cytometry core facility at Sloan Kettering? You can visit the MSKCC FCCF webpage. You can search that in Google. You can access that through the intranet at MSKCC. They have information up there about how to access the license. We just had a question here. It came in about exporting in vectorial format direct for Illustrator import. All right. So what we can do here in FCS Express is we don't export directly to Illustrator. However, we do export in vector format directly to PowerPoint, right? So generally, we get a lot of questions from people that are used to using Flojo about how do I get these things in the vector format into Illustrator because I have to pull them apart and I have to do this, that, and the other thing. Well, the good news is, you don't have to do all that in FCS Express just because of the way that we export these things directly. I know Flojo exports as one kind of big image, and you have to pull all those things apart into vector format, into Illustrator, or use the Illustrator export. Again, these PowerPoint exports in FCS Express, these are vector graphics automatically, right? They're all individual graphics. You can ungroup them, you can group them, you can copy and paste these things into Illustrator if that's something that you want to do. You can export them to EMF format from FCS Express directly. But again, what we find is there isn't a lot of hullabaloo about exporting things in FCS Express because it works the way that you would expect that you would want it to. And that's, again, one of the kind of big differences between working with other software packages that are out there and available to you. So again, hopefully people won't be putting little white text boxes over their access labels anymore, right? You can just type in live and dead stain if that's what you wanted to do once you get this stuff out the PowerPoint. But again, you can kind of do that directly in FCS Express if you needed to as well. So great question. Thanks for asking that, Marco. I really appreciate that. All right, and I don't see any additional questions coming through the chat now. So again, what I should mention, I know folks will have questions after the call. That's fine. You can direct those to support@DeNovoSoftware.com. I challenge you to test out our team, see how fast we get back to you. I think you're going to really appreciate how fast our team works with you. And again, thanks very much for joining us today on the webinar. We're looking forward to the next one next week. And thanks again, especially to Kathy and Rui for hosting these. We really appreciate that.
Perfect.
So thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you. Yeah, thank you so much, Sean. So we'll see everyone next week. If anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out. Rui put in some the link about the license and everything, and also lastly, I put in some previous recordings we had on FCS Express as well. So that's in the chat box as well. But thank you so much, Sean, and we'll see everyone next week.
Take care. Bye-bye.